The alarm did not build slowly. It hit all at once, a sharp red pulse across every screen in the security office, and my hearts, all three of them, seized at the same moment. Containment field, Enclosure 9, failing. I was on my feet before I even understood what my body was doing. My name is Oren, and I have served as Deputy Warden of the Threshold Containment Facility for 11 long cycles, and in all that time, no sound had ever made my blood run cold the way that alarm did. Enclosure 9 held Subject 9, and Subject 9 was the reason we had 40 locks on a single door. I grabbed the comm unit from my desk, my claws trembling against the casing. Grace, my second in command, was already moving through the corridor outside, her boots hitting the metal floor in a fast, steady rhythm. "Talk to me," I said into the comm, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. "Power fault in the eastern grid," Grace answered, breathless. "It's chewing through the backup lines faster than we can patch them. The mechanical bolts are holding, the gravitic dampeners are holding, but the primary field, the one that actually keeps that thing from walking straight through the glass, that one just died." I looked at the screen. The live feed from the west corridor showed the enclosure exactly as Grace described. The soft blue shimmer that had covered the hyperglass for the better part of a year was gone. What remained was solid glass and 40 locks, and nothing else standing between us and 4 tons of muscle and claw that had already ended 14 lives before we ever got it into that cage. And then my heart stopped again, for a different reason. There was a small shape in that corridor, a human, alone, pushing a cleaning cart, exactly where he was every single morning at this hour. Dale. "Get him out of there," I shouted into the comm, so loud that Grace flinched on the other end. "Now, before that glass gives." "I'm 2 corridors away," she said. "I won't make it in time." I switched the feed to full screen and watched, helpless, as the last mechanical lock on the enclosure gave a soft click and released. Subject 9 did not wait. It never waited. In under 2 seconds, it was through what remained of the failing barrier, and it was standing in the open corridor for the first time since the day we had captured it from the wreck of a smuggler's vessel, back when its claws and teeth had already taken more lives than any of us wanted to count. Dale was 3 meters away from it. He had not even had time to drop his mop. I want to explain, before I tell you what happened next, exactly what we were dealing with, because you need to understand the size of the fear in that corridor. Subject 9 was not simply dangerous. It was built for one purpose, and that purpose was to end whatever stood in front of it. 2.5 meters of coiled muscle, 6 eyes that could track movement faster than our own scanners, and a set of claws that had, on the night of its capture, torn through reinforced plating like it was old cloth. Our xenobiologists had studied every creature on record across a dozen systems, and they told me, quite plainly, that nothing else came close. We had lost 11 people bringing it aboard. We lost 3 more in the first month, before we understood how little our old procedures meant to something like that. After the 3rd loss, the facility board approved 40 separate locking mechanisms for a single enclosure. 40. Mechanical bolts, biometric scanners, gravitic dampeners, and 3 systems that even I did not fully understand, layered one on top of the other, because a single failure should never have been enough to let that thing walk free. And now a single failure was exactly what had happened, and it had happened in front of a man with a mop. On the screen, I watched Subject 9 turn its head toward Dale. Every eye locked onto him at once. I have seen that creature threaten armed guards through solid glass, throwing its full weight against the barrier hard enough to make the whole corridor shake. I expected, in that moment, to watch something I would never be able to forget. Instead, Dale set the mop down. He did it slowly, without any sudden movement, the way you might set down something fragile. Then he lifted both of his hands, palms open, and he did not step back. "Easy," he said. The corridor mic caught it clearly, and I have replayed that recording more times than I can count since that day. "Easy. I know you're not trying to hurt me. Let's not make a mess of this for either of us." Subject 9 did not move for a long moment. 6 eyes stayed fixed on him, and every guard rushing down that corridor, weapons raised, was certain we were about to lose a 4th casualty, on top of the 14 we had already suffered. I was certain too. I will not pretend otherwise. I had my claw over the emergency channel, ready to give an order that would have ended that creature's life the instant it moved, because in my mind, there was no version of this where a small, unarmed man in a work uniform survived being 3 meters from an apex predator with nothing between them but open air. But Subject 9 did not move to attack. It lowered its head instead. Slowly, the posture our xenobiologists had spent a full year trying and failing to see from that creature, the one they described in every failed report as submission, or perhaps curiosity, or perhaps something we did not yet have a word for. Dale did not run. He did not even step back. He crouched down, just slightly, bringing himself closer to the creature's eye level instead of further from it, and he kept talking in that same low, steady voice. "I know," he said. "I know it's loud out here. I know the lights are wrong. You're not in trouble. Just stay easy with me a little longer." Grace arrived at the end of the corridor 40 seconds later, her weapon raised, 3 other guards close behind her. I gave the order to hold position through the comm, my voice barely steady. Nobody fired. Nobody moved. We simply watched a small human kneel 3 meters from the most dangerous creature any of us had ever contained, and we watched that creature, for the first time in a full year, choose to sit down instead of striking. It took another 11 minutes for the backup systems to restore the primary field. 11 minutes of my heart's hammering against my chest, while Dale kept talking in that same calm voice, telling the creature about nothing in particular, the weather cycles outside the station, the schedule change to its feeding routine, small useless facts that meant nothing, and somehow meant everything. When the field finally hummed back to life, Subject 9 rose, turned, and walked back through the broken glass into its enclosure, without a single guard needing to fire a shot. The mechanical locks re-engaged behind it one by one, all 40 of them, and the corridor fell silent. Dale picked his mop back up like nothing unusual had happened at all. I pulled him into my office within the hour. My claws were still shaking when I closed the door behind him. "Do you understand what almost happened out there?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, sitting down across from me without being asked. "Power dropped. Big guy got loose. Everybody panicked. I've had worse mornings. You had no weapon, no training. That creature has ended 14 lives. And it didn't end mine," he said. "I think that's worth thinking about." I did not have an answer for that, so I asked him the question I had been carrying since the very first week he started his rounds through that corridor, long before the power failure, long before any of this. "Why do you go there every morning? There are other floors, other corridors that need cleaning. You always stop at that one." Dale leaned back in his chair, thinking for a moment before he answered. "You ever notice how everybody in this whole station talks about that thing like it's a weapon and not an animal? 14 locks would have been enough to keep it in, and you built 40. You didn't build 40 locks because you were worried about escape. You built 40 locks because you were scared, and you never stopped being scared, not for one single day since you caught it." "With good reason," I said. "Maybe," he answered, "but fear like that does something to a creature on the other side of the glass. It postures, because everyone who ever looked at it like a nightmare. It throws itself at the wall, because nobody ever gave it anything else to do in a whole year of its life, except sit in a box and be afraid of. I just went and looked at what it was actually doing, instead of what everybody kept telling me it was." I sat with that for a long time after he left my office. Over the following days, I pulled every observation log from the past year and studied them more closely than I ever had before. What I found unsettled me more than the power failure had. Subject 9's threat behavior, the pressing against the glass, the snarling, the repeated attempts to break through a barrier it must have known by then was unbreakable, had dropped by more than half since Dale had started his rounds. It still displayed those behaviors toward every other member of staff who passed its enclosure. Toward Dale, and only Dale, it did something none of our equipment had a proper name for. It stayed low. It watched him without aggression. On several recordings, it made a sound that fell somewhere between a growl and something closer to a question, a sound our translation systems could not classify because nothing in our database had ever recorded a predator making it before. Nora, our lead xenobiologist, sat across from me in the following week's briefing, with the same troubled look I imagine had been on my own face for days. "It's not calm," she said, tapping through the footage on the screen between us. I want to be very clear about that. What you're seeing is not a docile animal. Don't mistake this for safety. Then what is it? I think, she said slowly, choosing her words with real care, that for the first time since we brought it aboard, it has met one creature that does not treat it like a threat to be managed, and I think it has absolutely no idea what to do with that. I asked her the question that had been sitting in my chest since the day of the power failure. Could it have hurt him? In that corridor, with nothing between them? Nora was quiet for a long moment. Every measurement I have says yes. Every instinct that creature has says yes. And it didn't. I don't have an explanation good enough to satisfy either of us, Oren. I only have the footage. We spent the next several weeks trying to understand what we had witnessed, and in that time, something else became clear. It was not only Subject 9's behavior that had changed, ours had too. The facility board, shaken by how close we had come to losing far more than 14 lives in that corridor, ordered a full review of Enclosure 9. What they found embarrassed every one of us who had worked there for years without asking the right questions. The enclosure had no natural light. No open sightline beyond 4 meters of reinforced glass and a windowless wall. No enrichment of any kind. Nothing to occupy a mind that our own scientists admitted, in their private notes, was almost certainly far sharper than we had allowed ourselves to consider. We had built a fortress to contain a threat, and in doing so, we had built a box that could drive nearly anything living inside it toward the very behavior we feared most. I brought this to Dale on one of his morning rounds, several weeks after the incident, while he mopped the same 4 meters of floor he mopped every single day. You knew this, I said. Somehow, without any of our instruments, without any of our training, you understood something about that creature that took us a year and a near disaster to even begin to see. He shrugged, the same maddening gesture I had come to expect from him by then. I didn't know anything you didn't know. I just didn't come to it already certain of what I'd find. Everybody who ever looked through that glass walked in already convinced it was a monster, so that's all they ever let themselves see. I walked in not knowing what to expect, and I let it show me instead of deciding for it. That could have gotten you hurt. Could have, he agreed. Didn't. We redesigned Enclosure 9 over the following months. Wider space. A ceiling panel that let in real light from outside instead of the dull artificial glow we had used before. Enrichment structures that our behavioral team had studied on species with similar needs across 3 other systems. It was not a small undertaking, and it was not a cheap one, and more than one member of the board argued loudly against spending resources on the comfort of a creature that had already cost us 14 lives. I argued back, harder than I expected myself to. I told them what I had watched happen in that corridor. I told them what Nora's data had shown us, week after week, about a creature whose worst behaviors had begun to fade the moment it met one person who did not treat it like a nightmare waiting to happen. The board approved the redesign, though the 40 locks stayed exactly where they were. I understood why. Some fears do not disappear simply because you understand where they came from. Institutions move slower than understanding does, and I was not willing to bet a single life on hope alone, no matter what I had seen with my own eyes. 6 weeks after the new enclosure was finished, I stood in the observation room and watched Subject 9 move through its expanded space for the first time. It walked the full length of the enclosure slowly, almost cautiously, as though it did not quite trust the extra room to be real. It paused beneath the new ceiling panel and stood there for a long time. Still, its head tilted toward the light in a way that made something tighten in my chest that I did not have a proper word for. It had not thrown itself against the glass once since the redesign began. Not a single time. Dale still made his rounds every morning, exactly as he always had, though the corridor outside Enclosure 9 looked nothing like it once did. He stopped at the same spot he always stopped at, mopped the same section of floor a little slower than the schedule strictly required, and hummed the same off-key tune through his breathing filter while he worked. I asked him once, near the end of my time reviewing that whole difficult year, whether he had ever been afraid, even for a moment, standing in that corridor with nothing between himself and a creature capable of ending his life in a single movement. He thought about it longer than he had thought about any of my other questions. Sure, he admitted. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I felt nothing. But being afraid of something doesn't mean you have to treat it like it's already decided to hurt you. Most things, given half a chance and a little patience, would rather not. And if you had been wrong? Then I'd have been wrong, he said simply. But I wasn't, and I think that matters more than what could have happened instead. I still think about that conversation more often than I expected to. In all my years at that facility, I had built my entire understanding of safety around locks and barriers and distance, around the belief that the only way to survive something dangerous was to keep it as far from you as possible and hope the walls held. Dale had walked toward the very thing we spent every resource we had trying to keep away from us, and in doing so, he had shown all of us something none of our 40 locks ever could. Fear had built that enclosure. Fear had built every wall in that facility, in one way or another. And fear, left alone with nothing else to answer it, only ever grows larger the longer you let it sit in the dark. The locks remain on Enclosure 9 to this day. I do not think they will ever be removed, and I have made my peace with that. Some caution is simply the price of living alongside something powerful enough to end you, and no single act of quiet courage changes that fact entirely. But every morning, when Dale wheels his cart down that corridor and stops at the same 4 meters of floor, something on the other side of that glass rises to meet him. Not with claws bared, not with the desperate, repeated force of a creature trying to break free of everything holding it back. It simply moves closer to the glass, quietly, the way you might move closer to the only window in a room that ever let in real light, and it waits there, watching, for as long as Dale stays. I do not know if what passes between them has a proper name in any language we have ever recorded. I only know that in 11 cycles of guarding that facility, I never once expected the bravest thing I would witness to come from a man with a mop and an open pair of hands, standing perfectly still in front of the one door we had never trusted enough to leave unlocked.